Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video as we are going to do a few lottery simulations here today, and the entire purpose of this is to talk about possible situations and scenarios that could arise in the NBA draft lottery. This video is going to be, I think, quite a bit of fun, looking at some potential scenarios in which certain teams outside the top 5 move up into the top 4. What happens if some of the teams in the top 4 shuffle around? We're going to cover all of that and more. We're going to look at what potential prospects could make some sense for which team at the very top, especially this year, where there isn't a clear, concise number 1, number 2 overall pick, whereas last year it was pretty clear the top 3 picks in the draft, even the top 4 picks in the draft, were going to be in any order. Victor Wembanyama obviously at the top, and then from there Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, who had a little bit of back and forth conversation at 2 and 3, and then Amen Thompson as well had some real steam going into the final couple of weeks. So this year is going to be a little bit more wide open, which means teams are going to draft more based off of fit. So let's talk about all of those potential fits and more in this video, and let's look at the actual lottery here. So the teams with the best odds are the Detroit Pistons and Washington Wizards. Both of them have a 14% chance at netting the first overall pick. Then the Hornets and Blazers both sit at around 13.3% chance to have the first pick. The Spurs are at 10.5% chance to have the first overall pick and about a 45% chance or so to be picking in the top 4. The biggest thing to remember is only the top 4 picks are done through the NBA draft lottery. So at worst, the Detroit Pistons, for example, will be picking 5th overall because the top 4 picks are done through the lottery and then the rest is done by standing. So since the Pistons have the worst record in the league, the lowest they can possibly pick is 5th if they don't get selected. But there's a 52% chance that they do get selected in that top 4. So that's something to watch for. Obviously, there are some pick swaps in here to talk about as well. The Brooklyn Nets owe their pick to Houston completely unprotected. The Rockets owe their pick to the Thunder. However, that pick is top 4 protected. So there's a world here where Houston maybe has not only 1 but 2 top 4 picks in this year's draft. There's also a world where Houston's pick itself moves up into the top 4, completely excluding the Thunder from the lottery, and the Rockets have that other lottery pick from the Brooklyn Nets. There's a lot that can happen. That Golden State Warriors pick traded to the Portland Trailblazers. That pick's been moved multiple times now. That pick has a top 4 protection on it. There's a lot that can really shake up this year's draft. At the top, obviously, the Raptors pick is top 6 protected. They tanked the end of the season to get that pick to number 6. But if a team below them jumps up in the lottery, that pick will convey to the San Antonio Spurs. So a lot of stuff to watch for. Obviously, I just spent a minute or so breaking down some of the biggest things to keep our eyes on draft lottery night. But let's go ahead and simulate our first lottery simulation here. And the Portland Trailblazers, look at that. Kind of previewed this a little bit in my most recent video up on the channel where I did some predictions on who I think would win the lottery. I did have the Portland Trailblazers very prominently near or at the top. I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't watched it, but they were in the top 4. I will give that away. But the Houston Rockets here, so if you're a Rockets fan, this is pretty exciting. Getting the 2nd overall pick would be obviously huge for them. This gives them severe trade ammunition. And with that being the case, you notice the Toronto Raptors do fall out of that top 6. So that pick does convey, in fact, to San Antonio, who has picks at number 7 and number 8 in this scenario. So let's just talk about some potential options here. For Portland, you would think Alex Sarr would definitely be in play for them. Wouldn't completely rule out Zachary Resau's for them at this point in time, but I do think Alex Sarr would be probably the leader in the clubhouse. I think out of every prospect in this year's draft, most teams will feel comfortable with him as the number 1 overall pick because of his projectable upside and defensive length, combination of fluidity, mobility. I just think he is as close as it gets to the total package from a size, length, athleticism profile in this year's draft, with projectable upside offensively, and then defensively obviously just covers so much ground and could be a really good rim deterrent as well in the league. So even though Portland has a couple of bigs already in Ayton and in Robert Williams, they also feel pretty good about some of their younger guys that they found. Obviously, Duop Reith, not very young, but he was a rookie. The Blazers like some of their big men, but I still think talent would reign through for them. Houston moving up to 2 becomes a total wild card. Like Zachary Resau is probably the one that makes the most sense as a high upside 3-and-D wing player who can attack closeouts and make a couple plays off the bounce. Not really the MO of his game, but I think for Houston, what you're really looking for is floor spacing, adding more size and length into your roster. We see for playoff teams how essential that is each and every year. It's another good get for Houston and a pretty safe addition for them. Detroit at 3 would be a real wild card as well. There's a lot of players that could really come to mind. And then Memphis moving up into the top 4 would probably hand deliver them Donovan Clingan. In a lot of my mocks, I've been mocking Donovan Clingan to them even outside of the top 4. But in the event that they do move up into the top 4, well, Clingan would be the no-brainer decision, I think, for them at that spot, assuming Alex R is off the board. But you never know. They could look at a wing as well. I know some people are a little bit higher on G.G. Jackson than I am. I think G.G. Jackson's an interesting player. Obviously has a lot of traits and tools that are interesting to work with, but I also have some skepticism about how he's going to fit next to John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. when the squad's all healthy again. So those are some of my questions for the Memphis Grizzlies. Do they look wing? Do they look big man? Obviously Detroit, Houston are kind of the pivot points in this year's draft if this is actually what happens on lottery night, but there's no guarantee. So let's simulate another lottery here. This time the Washington Wizards move up to pick number 1. The Rockets again up to pick number 2. We've already talked about this scenario. I think for Washington, again, we're going to focus on Alex Sarr here. Just like I said earlier, the leader in the clubhouse, the most likely number 1 pick at this point. Washington was a really bad defensive unit. They traded Daniel Gafford at the trade deadline. They really badly need a big man. He would be the best fit for them. Chicago needs a combination of length and size. I do think Donovan Clingan will be in play for the Bulls if they move up into the top 4, just because looking at how Nikola Vucevic has performed the last couple of years, he is on a clear downward trend at this point of his career. So I think for the Chicago Bulls, you need to draft a center or at least someone with positional size in the front court. Kobe White's going to be a mainstay piece for them moving forward. They feel really good about him. Ayo Dosunmu, I think, has staying power there in Chicago. They like Caruso. We'll see if Lonzo Ball can ever get healthy. He just opted into his player option. But very interesting, the Pistons down at 4. I think the Pistons could be, one thing I want to talk about with them, a real trade candidate. A team that could really look to ship their pick this offseason. They have cap space. Obviously, people will assume that they'll go out into free agency with that cap space, could target someone like a Tobias Harris, which has been heavily rumored and something I do expect to actually happen in free agency this offseason. But they don't have to use all of that cap space in free agency. They could go out and use it in the trade market as well, look to bring in players. And then for teams, first of all, you could trade up into the top 4. Even though this draft, there's a lot of quote-unquote questions, getting a top 4 pick is always good. I'm telling you right now, there's going to be 15 to 20 players in this draft that really have an impact on winning. I think this is actually a pretty underrated draft because, yes, even though there's not a Victor Wembanyama, there's no Zion Williamson, John Morant, I will completely concede that. There is not a top-end superstar type player, but what I do believe there is in this draft is a bunch of guys who can be quality starters, can be high-impact contributors in winning basketball scenarios, and that's really, when it comes down to it, what you want in drafts. You want a bunch of players who can be positive, high-impact people in winning. Now, there are some teams we saw move down here. Charlotte falls again. Portland falls again. San Antonio gets picked 7 and 8 again in this mock simulation. Memphis at 9 this time. That's where they're probably risking not getting Donovan Clingan. What would they look to do in that event? Do they trade the pick themselves? Or do they look to move up aggressively? That could be an option as well. Utah down at 10. Very notably, the Utah Jazz own a top 10 protection on their own pick this year. So if it fell down to 11, which I think it's like a 1%, 2% chance, not very likely, but there's a world that Utah could send that pick to Oklahoma City, I believe. The Hawks at 11, that's obviously tough for them. Let's get another lottery simulation here, though, and keep talking through some of these potential scenarios. Washington back at the top, kind of the same similar Alex Sarr situation. Here's a weird one, though. The Atlanta Hawks move up to number 2, and I had a comment on one of my videos talking about Atlanta moving up and how that maybe frees them up to make a trade this offseason of one of DeJounte Murray or Trae Young, maybe even both of them. Say the Atlanta Hawks fall in love with a Serbian guard in Nikola Topic. Well, that would probably require some moving pieces in that existing backcourt already. And the Los Angeles Lakers would be a team hunting Trae Young. There are a few others as well. The Orlando Magic could go after either one of DeJounte Murray or Trae Young. I think DeJounte Murray would be the better fit in Orlando, to be honest with you. But obviously Trae Young is still an intriguing option. I think Atlanta would be very well primed to make a trade, very similar to when the New Orleans Pelicans won the first overall pick in the draft that was Zion Williamson, I believe 2019. Yeah, 2019 is for sure the year because Luka was 18 and 20 was Cade. So looking at Atlanta here, or not Cade, Anthony Edwards, excuse me. Cade was 21. Atlanta here would be very, very primed to make a trade. The Toronto Raptors move up into the top 4. Now in this scenario, they obviously keep their pick. As a result, the Spurs even fall down to pick number 7. This is not a great situation for the Spurs in this example, but Toronto would have a really good opportunity to add more shooting, add more floor spacing. They would also be an underrated team to watch for in a Donovan Clingan draft pick. Yes, I know they have Jakob Poeltl, but if they're looking for long-term center play that is affordable, especially with the Jonte Porter situation, him getting banned, I think the Raptors could use one more front court piece. They traded for Kelly Olynyk, who's kind of a hybrid forward center, probably more of a point forward, kind of, roamer between power forward center, not really a true center. Toronto would be interesting. Charlotte here at 3 would be another team to watch for. Just adding more young talent to already a pretty good young core. Now, I think this team is still probably a little bit of a ways away, but I do like their hiring of Charles Lee. I think he was a very, very good candidate and someone who's going to make the Hornets a much better basketball team in the short term and long term, looking at this team's future outlook. Let's do another lottery simulation here. The Hornets move up to number 1, and that poses a really interesting question for the Hornets about Mark Williams and his future as the starting center there in Charlotte. Would the team draft Sarr, and would they start Sarr over Mark Williams? Williams has dealt with some injuries. Obviously, that has been a real struggle point for him. The Grizzlies moving up to 2 is really sneaky because, again, I've referenced Clingan multiple times in this video, but for the Grizzlies specifically at pick number 2, what I would love to see them do in this situation is to trade back down out of this spot and try and get another asset. If that means trading with Utah, for example, getting pick 8 and pick 29, giving them just a little bit more flexibility, whether that's for another trade down the road or if that's for just picking up a couple more young guys. They did trade out David Roddy this past year for a draft asset. The Grizzlies, I don't think they necessarily need to have a pick in the top 2 this year. And at 8, maybe they could find a way to move back up for cheaper, maybe 8 and a second round pick to move back up to 5 or something. There would be some flexibility here for Memphis to move back up, get their guy anyway, and maybe pick up an extra draft pick in the process. The Toronto Raptors moving up to 3, kind of the same situation we just talked about. The Pistons, Wizards, Portland, and San Antonio obviously kind of falling short here in these simulations. Let's do another one though, because I'm having a lot of fun with this video. I hope you guys are as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I would also love for you guys to all go give us a follow on Twitter. We're nearly at 2,000 followers over on the Twitter, so go give us a follow right now. Huge shout out to everyone that does end up following. This one kind of more of a conventional Charlotte at 1, San Antonio at 2. I think the Spurs are a team that will move up into the top 4 this year. I just have a feeling in my gut. Last year I predicted them to get the number 1 overall pick. It just felt like Wembanyama was destined for San Antonio. I had a really fun video to record on that after the fact as well about destiny and how Wembanyama was meant to play in San Antonio. And then the Raptors here at 3 again. Portland at 4 I think would be a fascinating spot for them. They could be a team to watch for Matas Buzelis, someone who could fit into their front court pretty well. Ron Holland kind of gives them similar juice to what Shaedon Sharpe has downhill, but it would be kind of an infusion of talent if he's there. I think Toronto could be a really good Ron Holland destination. San Antonio could use him for his downhill physicality. That doesn't really help in the playmaking category, not really the Greg Popovich type of player, but the Spurs could use a little bit more athleticism, so that would be definitely something to watch for. The Spurs, I think, it's funny, a lot of Spurs fans were commenting saying, dude, it seems like we're getting Nikola Topic in every mock. So people, I guess, I've been mocking Nikola Topic to the Spurs quite a bit. I think a lot of other people must be doing that as well. His positional size and his playmaking just really stand out to me as perfect fits there with the Spurs alongside Wembanyama and Devin Vassell. Obviously, there are some concerns about his game too, but overall, he just seems like a really great fit with Victor, not only in maximizing Wembanyama, but also getting the most out of the other guys around those two in the pick and roll. So it would be very, very fascinating what San Antonio does. At pick number 2, do they just take Topic there? Or does San Antonio maybe even aggressively try and move up one spot with Charlotte to get Alex Sarr? That would be fascinating. Here, Detroit gets the first overall pick. Pistons fans are happy about that. Toronto moves up into the top 4 again. Very fascinating. And the Grizzlies at number 2. Let's do one more lottery simulation here. Wow, this is a good one to end on. Oh my gosh. So a lot of the times here we've seen Charlotte jump up into that number 1, number 2 spot. That would be huge for the Hornets. Again, Alex R would be really great for them. But this is the big time buzz one here in Sacramento. Pick number 2 for the Sacramento Kings could be tremendous. First of all, if the Kings get the number 1 overall pick, oh my, Alex R next to Domantas Sabonis. Wow, that would be really awesome. He would give them like he'd be like the perfect power forward in Sacramento. I'm not even gonna lie, like he would be really, really great there because he brings some of that rim protection, but he's mobile enough to guard other fours around the league. Think about him having to match up with the Karl Anthony Towns in Minnesota. Think about putting him on an Aaron Gordon in Denver. That's kind of the blueprint to trying to beat the Nuggets, trying to beat teams like the Timberwolves. You have to match them with size. The Kings would have the ability to do that. Obviously, Sabonis is such a great rebounder. That would make up for one of Sarr's biggest concerns. But let's say Sarr's off the board. What would Sacramento look to do at pick number 2? This is an underrated Stephon Castle destination. I think Stephon Castle would be so good in Sacramento, especially with the likelihood that Malik Monk is gone. The Kings getting a guard who is a real two-way phenom, someone who has great point of attack defensive coverage skills. I think can really mirror the ball handlers, stay connected to them through screens. I think his screen navigation is toward the top of the entire class. Would be really fascinating to see Sacramento get Stephon Castle. He's a bigger guard. I think could really fit in nicely. We saw how impactful Keon Ellis was for the Kings. I think he's a better Keon Ellis. I think he would just be a significant enhancement and improvement into their lineup, and I think his ability to handle the basketball, finish at the rim are all a little bit underrated as well. So Sacramento would get a very, very good prospect in Stephon Castle. Even though a lot of people would probably view that as a reach, second overall, I think it would be a really good pickup for them. Memphis at 3, definitely still in that Klingon conversation, or maybe a Zachary Rissacher, some forward. The Kings could also look at Rissacher too. I should mention that as just kind of a 4-man who can shoot the ball around Sabonis. I think upgrading in the 3-point department from what Harrison Barnes currently gives you to what Rissacher or insert player X would be really phenomenal for the Kings. And then the Utah Jazz move up 4 spots here to get to pick number 4. I think this would be obviously a huge step in the right direction for this organization. Ron Holland would be a really good get for them. This team's also very thin on wings. I could see the Jazz trading down a few spots, trying to pick up extra assets. Obviously, Danny Ainge always trying to work the phone. So Utah could be in a great spot here, trying to add a wing, maybe move down, draft Cody Williams a little bit later. There's a lot of options here. One team that did not move up at all was the Houston Rockets' own pick, which, might not sound like a big deal. Obviously, I talked about them in the top 4 with that Brooklyn pick a bunch, but the Thunder in this mock simulation, they kept all of their picks right at either 12 or 13 in all of these simulations. So the fact that I think that's another big storyline to watch is, does Sam Presti make a trade to move up in the draft for Cody Williams or for another player that he really likes? Obviously he has such a bias towards playmaking. I could see him falling in love with Stephon Castle, though, as a potential Josh Giddey replacement, keeping, kind of their guard play on cheap contracts around Shea, J-Dub, and Chet Holmgren. That would be fascinating. So the Thunder, who are already a really good feel-good story this year, they've had a phenomenal season thus far. I think they're a team to watch for in a potential trade-up. The Spurs in this simulation as well have 2 picks in the top 10 once again. I really hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more content, join that Discord, links in the description, go give us a follow on Twitter as well. Please subscribe to the channel. We're nearing 25,000 subscribers, which is incredible. We're a fourth of the way to 100,000 subscribers, which is unbelievable. I never thought we'd even get anywhere close to this point. And it's all because of you guys. You guys are the MVPs of the channel. So thanks to everyone once again. Make sure to go give us follows, join that Discord, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.